where teams can get punished very heavily if they don't have absolutely perfect runs.
Yeah, and we've been able to already see some of the Night Elf tech coming into play at great effect here to make sure they can skip past some of those inspiring mobs. They can get around some of the more dangerous trash packs and everything. So very much want to look at how those teams are putting some of those pulls together. And it kind of reminds you a little bit of Season 1 BFA Infested, where they're just crowd controlling some of those priority mobs, or in this case, inspired mobs, so that they can deal with the rest of the trash pack, shadow meld it off, just leave that mob off on its own. So we'll see what these teams have in store for us, as it's going to be game number 1 between Ambition and Obey Alliance in Theater of Pain.
Yeah, and I'm also excited for comps as well, because we've seen the Resto Druid yesterday and that Prot Warrior, and it looks like, again, we see that Prot Warrior and oh, they're playing Horde!
Oh, both of them are playing Horde!
Oh, double Horde! Wow, alright, that's very interesting.
Well, I think one of the reasons is Arcane Torrent is actually very good in this dungeon. Having that Purge is super valuable. I wonder what other reasons that you would have to play Horde beyond that, because
what do you want to Purge? What do you use it on?
Those Bone Mages. You need purges for the Bone Mages, and since they're not playing either a mage or a priest in this dungeon, they would need to be able to...
The Hunter can do it, right?
Oh, true, the Hunter could get it off. But I think they probably need more purges than just that. Normally, mages will spell steal.
Yeah. Huh. I guess if you do this one pull where you pull multiple mages together, I think it's even 5 of them. So I guess at that point, if you don't have an AoE dispel, then it just takes so long to get them off one by one, I guess. So that makes sense. And if you don't really need the Shadow Meld for anything else, even though we did see Complexity yesterday play a full Shadow Meld comp, and they used it to great success. They cleared this dungeon in 21 minutes approximately, and they used Shadow Meld a lot to Shadow Meld off inspired mobs that they had hard to seed in the back to make sure they don't have to deal with it at all. But yeah, very interesting difference here from a full Shadow Meld comp yesterday from Complexity to 2 full Horde comps here coming in between Ambition and Obey Alliance. And very cool to see that both of them are doing the same thing as well. Because I wonder if they talk to each other or they're just came up with this separately, right?
Gentleman's agreement. Yeah. I think that it's more likely than not that they came up with this independently. Obey Alliance didn't go with a significantly smaller pull off the rip. Instead of going for that 7% trash count, they ended up just going with that one bull, and Bloodlust did that, where Ambition was able to do the more ambitious pull and got all of the trash on top of that. Ooh, now we're seeing some pathing variants, where Obey Alliance has grabbed Varuth by himself, and Ambition is sitting here grabbing some of these Shackled Souls. It looks like they're probably going to pull Varuth into these Shackled Souls even.
That's actually pretty scary, because you have that 50% healing reduction while fighting Varuth, and these Shackled Souls can be incredibly dangerous because of the just random damage they do to players. Yeah. And then on top of that, you have Grievous. So now you have Grievous that you need to heal, plus the 50% healing reduction. That is incredibly scary, but looks like Ambition is dealing with it pretty nicely. And they also made sure they're going around this corner to make sure they can actually line of sight the charge from Varuth. He does target a person with that charge, but if you go line of sight, it actually doesn't go through. So really well done by them.
I think it's also surprising that we're seeing Prot Warrior again in this dungeon. It feels like just every single time that we see a Theater of Pain coming out, it's just another instance where the Prot Warrior makes its appearance again, just because of how block ends up working in this dungeon. Prot Warriors being very strong versus physical damage. Ambition going absolutely massive, pulling this Portal Guardian plus Incinerator plus a lot of these Shackled Souls, mirroring the pull that Obey Alliance just ended up doing, and pulled that off to great success as well.
Yeah, and I mean, look at this pull. You have this Arcalef, and you also have the Guardian. That's just huge amount of AoE damage coming into this group with the Grievous as well, but both of them doing a really good job dealing with this. Obey Alliance already done, but if you look at the trash percentage, quite a bit of trash in favor of Ambition because of that trash they did on the first boss, that additional trash they did there, and then maybe they also pulled some extra Shackled Souls as well. So definitely doing some bigger pulls on Ambition's side. Now Obey Alliance is going to the right side with those mages that they deal with. We've seen some teams recently actually go to the left side to those Shackled Souls, probably because of some count reasons, because they wanted to have a little bit of extra count to be able to skip something later on. But looks like Ambition is also going to the right side.
Yeah, and as you see for Obey Alliance, Skylark immediately, as soon as he landed on that platform, he immediately Arcane Torrents off those Bone Mage shields. For Ambition, Elismir, the moment that they land on that platform, he also torrents the shields off. So I think that that's the only reason that even makes sense for why these groups would be running Horde inside of this dungeon. Maybe they just couldn't get away with a Mage. They thought potentially even Windwalker was going to just be better than Mage as a whole. Something along those lines where it just didn't make sense in the composition to run either a Priest or a Mage in here.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I definitely do like the full Night Elf comp though, but I guess if Ambition and Obey Alliance are going to be playing that Paladin, then you're not going to be able to play a full Night Elf comp anyway, and then you cannot Shadow Melt off those inspired mobs. So I think this is like the other thing you can do if you don't want to run the Druid, right?
Yeah, true.
Ambition doing a pretty big pull again as they're getting this Guardian. It did see the inspired mob here. But see, this is, for example, a mob that you could just Shadow Melt off, right? If you don't want to deal with it by itself. Because dealing with these inspired mobs by themselves is, of course, something that is not very efficient. You want to always pull stuff on top of each other, want to make sure you get as much cleave in as possible.
All right, now Obey Alliance here has grabbed all of the Bone Mages on top of this Bone Reaver, getting Arcane Torrenting off all of those stuff, all those shields, and now this Bone Reaver is just getting cleaved down. Obey Alliance is starting to pull ahead just a little bit in terms of progression through the dungeon, but of course, as we talked about earlier, just the trash differential is going to be in favor of Ambition, so it's hard to gauge who's going to really be ahead until we see where Obey Alliance is going to have to make up for their trash later on. But as it currently stands, it looks like Obey Alliance is in a pretty good position, or at least is even with where Ambition is currently.
Yeah, they're looking really good so far as they're dealing with all of this trash pretty smoothly. Also making sure to have all of that focused target damage, because a lot of these pulls that we see, we have mobs that are like a lot higher HP than the rest of them. For example, here the Death Speaker on this pull that Obey Alliance is doing. So if you have a lot of focus damage and you make sure you actually get that single target damage out with the Rogue as well, that can help out with that one, then that's going to be a lot more efficient than if your damage dealers are just like mindlessly AoEing. And it looks like Obey Alliance is doing a really good job with that.
Yeah. Now Obey Alliance here getting ready to pull Koltharok, already dealt with all of their trash in this Lich Wing. Skylark is gearing up to pull that boss, and I suspect that they're going to try to pull some of these Shackled Souls into the boss. I wonder how many of them they're going to grab. You see 40 immediately tagging just a couple that are now walking up to that ledge. They are going to be evading out for a few moments, then they will teleport up to the platform after just a little bit of time. They will not be able to be targeted or kicked or anything like that, so that Bind Soul going out on the Rogue, a nice job of being able to heal up that just to make sure that he doesn't go down. Now these Shackled Souls can be DPS'd, as you see Skylark immediately drops that Spear Bastion onto them. They are CCing them and kicking them, making sure that they do not cause any problems on the rest of the group.
Yeah, this is actually a pretty scary pull to do, because you have the boss that already by himself does a lot of damage to your group because of those magic debuffs that are getting applied, plus the draw soul as well. And if you get unlucky and you get the draw soul plus the magic debuff on the same person, and you don't have a dispel, because obviously they only have the Holy Paladin single target dispel, they can't get rid of that second debuff unless they have some sort of defensive that they can use. So if you get unlucky, you get a bunch of them on the same person, plus you also have those Shackled Souls who are casting on that same person, and it can get really dangerous. And that's why they're also pulling that inspired one separately. You can see Ambition has the inspired Shackled Soul, no other mobs. Once this one is down, they can pull more, but definitely don't want to have the inspired and other ones, because at that point it's just going to be too much damage in the group.
And it's weird because one additional mob is actually not great cleave for this group. Oh my goodness, Onesie almost goes down on the side of Ambition. But as I was saying, one Shackled Soul is not actually great cleave for these teams, because the Hunter really wants 3 targets at a minimum, and just having one additional target doesn't allow that Hunter to be able to really reach the true value of his cleave on any significant level. Obey Alliance, though, killing Koltharok an order of magnitude faster than Ambition. However, once these Shackled Souls did get up on this platform for Ambition, they dropped a bunch of CDs, but I think Obey Alliance is starting to get a little bit of a lead, even though there is a trash advantage for Ambition here.
Yeah, definitely looks like it, as they're now moving on to that Gorge Up wing. It looks like 40 might be doing the Gorge Up pull as he's already... Actually, no, he's just going past to make sure he can use the misdirect here. I think he's going to use that freezing trap to make sure that the inspired mob is not going to be pulled, and just getting the Butcher plus the Sludge Spewer on top of this initial pull. This is actually a pretty crazy and difficult pull that they're doing here, because there's so many targets that need to be interrupted and just so much damage in the group. And if one of those casts goes through, then that's going to be a disaster. We also see the Ashen being committed here for Obey Alliance too.
Yeah, I think that they probably paralyzed the other Sludge Spewer that was inspired towards the front of the room, and they're going to be doing all of them at once here in just a moment, because we did see that Spear of Bastion, like you were talking about, it went down and it was able to keep all of the mobs inside of the circle. So I suspect that they're going to break this freezing trap, probably break a para off screen, and like I was talking about, now that Sludge Spear has jumped in, and they're going to do both of these mobs together, or at least deal with them in a more reasonable manner than doing them with the big pull. Whereas Ambition here, it looks like they're just running in. They have that inspired mob in the middle of the pack, and they're just going to have to deal with whatever may happen. You see that meat shield is just going off. It's a massive shield on that diseased horde that Obey Alliance was able to kick almost instantly by taking that pull just a hair slower.
They actually focused it down easily. So they went in, they popped the Ashen immediately, and they just focused down that inspired mob, and then they pulled the other trash on top. So they actually just dealt with it a little bit different. I guess they just basically didn't want to deal with the CC at all. They were just like, you know what, we're just going to focus it, and then we're going to move on. And it seemed to be pretty efficient. Of course, they're not going to deal with this bridge pack here, those 2 extra mobs, but when you think about it, I'm not sure if it's even worth it to deal with those 2 extra mobs, because you have that extra inspired that you don't want to deal with. So Ambition got done with this trash so much quicker. Of course, they did a little bit less because they didn't deal with those with the bridge pack. But yeah, Obey Alliance actually having an issue here, as one of their Windwalker actually goes down. They do have a battle rest and they get him back up, but everyone's so incredibly low, and everyone has Grievous stacks on top of that. This is one of those really difficult pulls because you have the gas bag, and there's just so much AoE in the group.
Oh, 40 dies too for Obey Alliance. That gas bag is just ticking on everybody. Everybody's so deep in Grievous, and it's just going to be a full wipe for Obey Alliance. They had actually just started to catch up and past Ambition even, and right at the final moment, you see why Ambition Invis Potion passed that gas bag and all of that trash there, because whenever it's on the side of Obey Alliance, yeah, it would have put them in the lead if they were able to get that pull off, but it just cost them their run, potentially, from that full team wipe.
Yeah, and that's one of those pulls that we keep talking about, that those MDI teams do. They pull the gas bag with a bunch of other trash, and it's just so much damage, especially when you have Grievous, right? It's 45, Grievous 22, the highest key level in the MDI, and they just don't manage to deal with it. Ambition, though, choosing to not deal with the gas bag at all. They don't want to have anything to do with that AoE damage coming into the group with the Grievous as well. So they just managed to get the trash in different areas of the dungeon, just decided to completely skip this. They're now up to 65% trash, even still ahead in trash percentage to Obey Alliance, and they're also really low on Gorge Up too. So very clean run by Ambition again. Just continuing off where they left off yesterday with those 0 death runs. They actually play. This is their 3rd dungeon, and they have 0 deaths still. No one ever died in their team just yet.
That will be an impressive stat. I wonder how long they're going to be able to make that happen for. This team, as a live key team, is known for being incredibly consistent, being able to play extended hours on end while continuing to play, just like I was talking about, very consistent. So I think that this is really one of their strengths, is just making sure that they are able to always have something going on, and they do end up getting Gore chopped down. The chat is spamming Wicked as JPC makes his way onto the hook, and now they're going to be going towards the Zav wing, just the final wing of Theater of Pain. And the Zav wing is probably one of the easier wings on Inspiring, especially compared to the technical aspects of how you have to set up some of these other pulls. But those Arbalists can be very dangerous, and where Ambition's count is currently standing, I suspect they're going to have to pull that champion pack that patrols down the middle.
Yeah, I think they might have to pull quite a lot here. They still need the 35% trash that they need on the board. And they dealt with I think, all of the trash, except maybe the Inspired mob? No, I think they dealt with all of it at the start, right? So there's nothing left that they can do there. So they have to do a lot of the mini-bosses too in this area, which can take a lot of time. And if you look at their comp, they do have a decent amount of single target damage, though, with the Rogue specifically, that can help out on that as well. And of course, they're running that full physical comp with the Warrior having the extra AP shout as well, making sure everyone does more damage, except Alismir, unfortunately. But it definitely is going to work out for them. And yeah, I mean, I like this route. I think it's actually really fast.
Well, yeah, this is the Chad full physical comp where they even bring both of the buffs, right? They bring that Mystic Touch and that Battle Shout from the Warrior. And now you have Billy grabbing that banner from that Necrolord, just giving them more versatility. And, ooh, Ambition has pulled 2 of these mini-bosses together. This is really scary.
Yeah, that's actually a lot of damage here. I think there's... Both of them have the shout, right? So you have... Oh no, Haruja doesn't do the shout, she does the charge.
Yeah.
So the Ricochet Blade that you need to line of sight. And the intro as well. And now they're pulling the trash. They had the a CC on the Captain, pulling in the Arbalest on top of Haruja here. This is actually pretty dangerous, as they have all of those bleeds coming out as well from the boss and from the Arbalest. So they're probably going to have to commit a bunch of defensives here. Ashen also being popped by Alismir, making sure he can keep everyone alive.
Yeah, Onesie immediately gets sacked whenever he gets double bled there. Really wished he had access to that Dwarf Racial. Now Onesie getting targeted with yet another bleed, immediately turtles it to not get hit by the Haruja bleed, while at the same time having that Arbalest dot on him. That's actually a really good use of his turtle there. The MM Hunter is definitely the highest liability to go down there. Obey Alliance having a couple more deaths. Unfortunately, they did get Gore Chop down, and they're trying to claw their way back. I feel like they're in a position where if Ambition just makes a very costly mistake, has a full team wipe on something, they can capitalize on it. But that mistake earlier in that Gore Chop wing for Obey Alliance has put them substantially behind.
Yeah, that was definitely a huge loss. You can also see the 7 deaths, of course, with the 35 seconds, the penalty that they have to deal with as well. And on top of that, of course, the time that they lost. Ambition now dealing with the 3rd mini-boss. Their Captain is still CC'd in the middle. They might be able to... Actually, I think that's... they're going to be playing the Captain while somebody else is actually dealing or just triggering the event for the last boss, right? Because there's this RP that is going on that you have to wait for before the boss spawns. So while that RP is happening, the rest of the group can just stay down and deal with that Captain.
So do you think it's not efficient for them to pull the Captain into Zav? Or do you think it's just too dangerous?
I think you don't need to, because you have to wait for the RP anyway, right? And
sure.
You need to do something there, right? So I guess they could... If they take longer to kill the Captain than it takes for the RP to go through, then they could theoretically pull the Captain into Xav at the very end. But yeah, I mean, the aura that he has is definitely a little bit scary.
Yeah, being slowed. Oh yeah, the Captain's aura is also really dangerous.
Yeah.
One of the also major things that you have to talk about whenever you're talking about Zav is Sagadon just menacingly standing right there off to the side. So you have to position yourself to be chained and then thrown down into that PvP zone just in a very specific spot to make sure that you do not pull Sagadon. We've seen teams last weekend, if they were standing in the wrong spot and Sagadon got pulled, that is basically a full wipe. There is no way that you can really recover from that. You see Onesie here and Azuna PvPing, Onesie spamming sit to try to get killed off as fast as possible. That Windwalker Monk, Billy was pressing way too many abilities. I watched the AWC, all Windwalker Monks have to do is press spinning crane kick. He's doing it wrong.
Yeah, I agree. That was definitely not the correct way of killing a hunter that is sitting down. As they did now manage to get back up. They even used the Bob here on the Windwalker to make sure he can just continue DPSing the boss while that AoE is going out. So just using small little tricks to make sure they can increase their damage a little bit. Especially since he just got up with that with the damage buff, right, from the duel. I think it's only 10%, I believe, the damage buff that he gets. So it's not huge, but it's still a little bit of an advantage to do. And once this boss is down, somebody that doesn't have any cooldowns available or who does the least amount of single target damage is going to go up and trigger that event. Looks like it's going to be Onesie.
No, they're sitting Alismir.
Oh no, Alismir even.
Which on Grievous, look at Nerf. He's sitting
like
he's sitting in a 4 stack of Grievous, which is
Yeah.
Pretty dangerous. He does have a pretty large shield on him right now, but not being able to get any of that Grievous off. I wonder if Azuna is going to have to cast any heals on him, or if Nerf being... We talk about Prot Warriors being immune to physical damage, and it's looking like that really holds true, as Nerf's health hasn't moved at all.
Huh.
In fact, it went
There
up
you go.
while having a 4-second Grievous. Huh. Not bad.
Yeah, that's actually pretty crazy. We saw some heals go out because you can see he's got 2 Grievous stacks now, so they used some direct heals on him to get rid of that. I saw Asuna cast one of those Vivifies as well to make sure he can stay alive. But it's interesting to see that they were so sure that Nerf doesn't need to be topped. Alismir just immediately went for it, and he saw that Nerf had 4 stacks of Grievous. He could have said, oh, I'm just going to heal you up first, and then I'm going to leave. But they were so confident in their ability that they don't need that healing, that they just immediately sent Alismir away, not worrying about Nerf at all. As they're now fighting more Dratha, that event got triggered, of course, by Alismir, so they can immediately go at the boss. They are at 100% trash. And they have 2 Tormentor debuffs, 50% slow and 50% physical damage increase on them, but that should not be a problem for them.
Yeah, and like you were talking about earlier, Nagura, they still have 0 deaths over the course of the whole entire weekend. And Mordretha, while they are playing it with 2 of those Tormented buffs, I suspect that on a 22 Fortified, this team that is known for doing upwards of 26 and 27 keys, I suspect that they are going to be able to handle this boss pretty easily. And Mordretha hitting 50% right as they were casting their frontal ability, and just ended up getting that canceled, and now Ambition dropping that Ashen Hollow, unleashing a lot more damage into this boss. Obey Alliance has finished off Zav, but it feels like it's almost too little too late. Those issues in the Gore Chop wing just come back to bite them, and Ambition is dropping Mordretha even increasingly lower.
Yeah, and if you look at the timer, yesterday we saw Complexity do TOP. They had the fastest time until now. They have a 21 minutes, 6 seconds clear, but Asuna goes down as they do have a balance to get him back up, but it's going to take a while. And the streak is actually, the streak's over as they lost one of their players now. But they're still going to beat Complexity's time here. So they're going to be the ones with the fastest Theater of Pain time. And they're going to be clearing this with 20 minutes and 45 seconds, winning that first dungeon against Obey Alliance.
That's right. Very, very impressive by Ambition. Like you said, they just barely ruined the deathless streak. But still, hey, incredibly good job there. And like you mentioned, this is the fastest Theater of Pain that we've seen yet, which, just for the series, Dranos, we were talking about it, this is a dungeon that's going to be played in the upper finals. So they need to be extremely, extremely good. And they were.
Yeah. And Obey Alliance as well. You know, if they didn't have that full team wipe there, they may have even had a faster run also. They may have had a faster still path through this dungeon. So incredibly tight competition at the top of our group here. At the start of this series, it really just goes to show that. Here's a look at those damage meters as well. You can see Azuna. One thing about a lot of teams is that person who has to do the Windwalker job, there's actually, on Ambition, it's like all 3 of their DPS, depending on which other specs they need. So they each have the different potential to be playing that Windwalker in different maps.
Yeah. It's been very, very impressive to look at a lot of the multi-classing that's been going on as well, that's been required from so many of these teams. But I like that point that you made as well, that if Obey Alliance didn't have that wipe, they didn't have that mistake, and if we can go into it as well a bit more, Dranos, it could have been even tighter.
Yes, let's talk about some cool Theater of Pain stuff. I think one thing to look at is the stuff that Prot Warrior can do in this dungeon. Making this first pull work is actually just really hard for any tank, but it's very heavy incoming physical damage, and you also need to make a lot of threat. Look at the damage meter here. Look how much damage Nerf is putting out on that Prot Warrior. And then this pull here, look at all those Bone Spears casting, right?
Yeah.
You run out of AoE stuns, but look at this combo, right? You have Spear Bastion and Ring of Peace. And the way this interacts, Spear Bastion just keeps yoinking him back into the Ring of Peace, and this will just work until the Ring of Peace expires, which is after a set amount of time or after it does like 50 knocks. So that is more than enough to give you like 5 extra seconds of CCs here. And then look at this pull. This pull has all these mobs that just jump all over the place, very annoying, get very far away, inefficient for damage, deadly casts. Yoink him right back in with that Spear Bastion again. So another huge piece of Prot Warrior utility. Both teams were making great use of that throughout this dungeon and making pulls like this, which are really, really tough. actually, doable. Not easy, but doable. And then you can see, even with some really great strats, even with a lot of stuff used, this pull on the bridge is just so painful. There you can see what's happening with those sludge spears just kind of getting all over the place, the Grievous stacks on everybody. This ended up being that most costly wipe that we've seen out of Obey Alliance so far this tournament. Contrast that with how Ambition pulled this area, and I think this is a really cool way to group everything up and get it all in that initial AoE of the Spear of Bastion as well. You see they just fired off the cooldowns on the trash as well. A lot of that doesn't even hit Gore Chop, so it's a little bit less efficient theoretically. And then one final beautiful piece of tech here. Check this out. The Reaping Scythe coming out on nerf. You hit the Spell Reflect and watch the damage meter. Prop Warrior jumps up by like... I think it reflects for like 40,000 DPS or damage when you fire off that Star Reflect there.
Oh man. Thank you for that one, Dranos.
Happy to help.
I also have official word from Anda that the official name for that comp is called Melee Boys.
Yeah. makes some good sense. And also, I liked that you really highlighted that Spirit Bastion too, because we've seen a lot of those pulls done very similarly with like Vengeance Demon Hunter, because they have all their sigils and everything. But like Tails just said, you're playing this all physical damage comp, all melee comp and everything. So there is going to be better damage and, like you said, better mitigation of that physical damage too, while still being able to do a lot of that same setup. So with that, one up on Ambition side, and we can start kind of focusing our efforts here, Nagura, on Mists coming up next.
Yeah, so Mist's affixes are interesting because the key level is pretty low. It's a 19, the lowest level of this season in the MDI, but it is tyrannical and bolstering. And bolstering in Mists can be tricky because the pulls that these teams are doing, they're a little bit delayed. So you start off with like one pack, and then you get some extra trash into that pull a little bit later, and then all of a sudden the HPs are not going to be the same across all of those trash mobs. So it can be difficult to deal with bolstering in here, and I believe that's also why we saw Complexity yesterday run a full Night Elf comp. They were running that Resto Druid, and everyone was running Night Elf, and in case something did go wrong for them with that bolstering, they could just shut them out off the aggro of that bolstered mob, and it has really high potential of being incredibly efficient by just basically ignoring one of those mobs and just dealing with the rest of it and then de-aggroing it. So we'll see what kind of comps we see from Ambition and Obey Alliance, because it seems like those two teams really don't agree with Complexity's comps at all, as they were also running a completely different comp in Theater of Pain too.
Yeah, and I liked that a lot because the times were very, very tight together. I mean, you said it was, 2045 versus the about 21-minute run that we saw out of Complexity. So we're getting really tight together with times on this one, Dratnos, but they're running completely different comps and factions as well.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show how many different good answers there are to the challenges posed by these dungeons with this season, with this metagame that we have. There's so many classes that bring unique strengths, and then you kind of try and work the rest of your comp around that, right? You're like, okay, well, because we're playing a Resto Druid, we all get to play Night Elves, what can we Shadow Meld? Or, okay, because we're playing this, double magic damage comp, let's enhance that further with stuff like Vengeance Demon Hunter to amp up our magic damage. And then you kind of get, as a result of those little tweaks on what the core of your group is, all the rest of your group changes around that to help enhance it even further.
That's right, and now we're going to be looking at, of course, Tyrannical coming in for this Mists run titles, but it is going to be a 19. So what are some of the expectations you got going on for this one?
I think that Tyrannical doesn't affect the dungeon all too much. I suspect that on the 19 level, the groups will be able to one-phase Ingram Malak pretty easily, especially since after we saw, like, last weekend, teams were kind of struggling at the beginning, and then at the end, they were doing this thing where they were just DPSing Ingra before they had the 90% damage reduction, and then would burn Drome, and then would be able to kill Ingra off in one phase, so I suspect that that's going to be pretty easy. I think the biggest thing for me is like the bolstering, how big you're going to be able to go in the maze with some of that interesting tech that we've seen, whether it be from Shard of D's, whether it be from Hunter pets pulling through walls. I think that those are the two most common things that we've seen across the whole entire weekend for ways to pull through the Mists wall. But it all comes down to like how big you can pull, since there is such a massive trash health disparity between stuff like the Guardians and the Tenders. Those mobs have just insane trash disparities in their health.
Yeah, and we've been looking primarily as well towards the Rogue Nagura to be that sort of equalizer for the group that has been balancing out all the health pools, allowing everybody else just to have their even cleave, and also just be able to bring down some of these bosses too, because they have so much HP.
Yeah, I think the Rogue is definitely incredibly valuable for exactly that, for those bolstering dungeons, for dungeons where you can pull trash on top of bosses, and then also for dungeons where you have inspiring. So you don't have to actually see the inspired mob, you can just pull it in with the rest of the trash, and the Rogue just finishes off the inspiring mob before the other mobs start casting, so you can actually interrupt them. So I do think the Rogue is just so valuable for these kind of dungeons, and then on top of that he also provides so much CC and utility as well, so probably gonna see a Rogue in this mist, I would say.
Yeah. Well, it was funny thinking about last season as well, when you were talking about like multi-classing going into this one, Dratnos. You know, we saw the JP cone trick and everything like that previously with a great push, and being able to look at, hey, I could play a bunch of different things if I need to on the side of JPC, but this season he's got to be really happy that Rogue is just in the meta, very popular.
Yeah, definitely loves playing that class whenever he gets the opportunity to, and it looks like it's in most of the dungeons that they will have that opportunity, but he is absolutely capable of flexing onto several different specs, that Ellie Shaman, the Shadow Priest, or even the Windwalker when the other two people need to be on their mains.
Yeah, that's always the funny thing of, you know, hey, he had to prove himself for multi-classing in previous seasons for great push and everything like that, and now he has the opportunity that what he loves is in the meta. He's going to be able to just be in that comfort zone as well. So game number 2 is going to be ready to roll here, as Ambition right now has the lead versus Obey Alliance. Let's get into it in Mist Eterna Scythe.
All right, well, let's take a look at what kind of comps they're going to be coming up with here. And it looks like... I'm not sure why you're oohing, because it's literally the same.
Yep, we have the same comp.
Yes,
that's why I'm oohing.
Mentioned before. All right, so they are... Yeah, so they're Alliance again. They switch from they switch back to Alliance. Don't need that Blood Elf dispel for anything here, but they're still running this full physical comp, right? They have the Prot Warrior, and they also have the Windwalker Rogue Hunter combination, but no full Shadow Meld comp here. So a difference to Complexity from yesterday, that do have the fastest time until now. They cleared this dungeon yesterday in 13 minutes 36. So let's see how close those two teams are going to be getting to that time.
So Nerf is playing Mecha Gnome. What is Skylark's character? What race is that? Is that Light Force?
I was wondering
Draenei?
that. I looked at it. It might be, yeah. Because I looked at it, I was like, what racial looks like this? But it might be, yeah. You can see his character now. It definitely looks like a Draenei. I don't even know what that racial does. Do you know?
It's an airstrike.
I'm gonna put you on the spot here.
It's a massive amount of AoE damage. It's just like like this big yellow light thing. I guess I called it an airstrike. I guess that's the best way of describing it. It just like puts a AoE around the mobs and explodes after a certain period of time and just detonates. It used to be really good damage. I actually have no idea what kind of damage it is right now, and I honestly have zero idea why Skylark would be playing Light Force Drain now. However, that is what he has selected for this, and his name is Skylark Dam, so maybe it's the best damage option for Prot Warrior. That would be the only thing that makes sense for me here.
Yeah, that does make sense. As we now see Ambition dealing with the trash a little bit quicker. It looks like they got those higher HP mobs done lower, quicker, and therefore they were able to get the rest of the trash in as well. Keep in mind it's bolstering, so that's why they did the pull this way. They basically just waited until the HP was equalized, and then they pulled in the rest. And they still have to deal with this Tormentor too, but they're just dragging it along because of the rest of the trash just dead. So they're just dragging it into the next pull.
Yep. Now Onesie getting a misdirection onto Nerf before grabbing his power. Nerf immediately pulling the boss, and now Ingram Malak has been engaged by Ambition. Obey Alliance hot on their heels, just a little bit slower. I feel like they're bow breakers. They spent too much time kind of grabbing the mushrooms and passively cleaving down the bow breakers, where Ambition was being a lot more deliberate with their damage. But Obey Alliance just hot on their heels, able to try to catch back up. And it's all going to come down to how fast these teams can kill off Ingram Malak. It is, of course, a 19 Tyrannical, so not the highest key level possible, and I suspect that both sides will be able to deal with this boss quickly, especially since they have Bloodlust available.
Yeah, it looks like Ambition really not cleaving Ingram that much at all. Neither of the teams, actually. It looks like both of them are just completely focusing the drone, and they must be very confident in their ability to one-face this boss without even getting the boss a lot lower before the damage increase goes off. Now, all eyes on Ambition. They did trigger their phase right here, as they have the Ashen pop, they have the Bloodlust used, they're using all of their offensive cooldowns to be able to get the boss done here. Obey Alliance now also in the phase as well. They did wait for one fear though, so Ambition got the Drone done a little bit quicker. They didn't have to deal with that fear. And Ambition definitely has enough damage. You can see the boss is going to go down in just a second. And yeah, I mean, look at the damage meter. That Paladin carry.
Yeah, Paladin always very strong inside of their Ashen Hollow. Obey Alliance gets Ingram Malok not close to where Ambition did. Ambition had Ingram Malok at about 1%, Obey Alliance at 10. Of course, it's not going to be too bad. You're going to be able to focus the boss here from this position, but it's just going to cost them a few more seconds. And Ambition has pulled Varuth with this first couple of trash mobs in the maze, while at the same time they are grabbing those pack off to the right-hand side, pulling it all on top of the Executioner. This is really dangerous because you have that Stalker Fox mob that can put a bleed on people, so if they don't get any CC on it, whether it be leg sweep, shockwave, or direct CC on that bleed, it can become problematic. And Ambition has some people getting feared. An explosive goes off. Everybody is so incredibly low right here, Nagura.
Yeah, that was actually, everyone got feared. I'm not sure what happened. They must have thought that the mini boss the Tormentor goes down before the fear goes out, but then it didn't, and everyone just got feared, and then of course all the explosive went up. But they did manage to recover, and no one actually went down. Wow. So that was impressive. It could have been a lot worse if there were multiple explosives that weren't dealt with before they got feared. It could have been a lot worse. So it looks like they got the right side of the maze. Obey Alliance, I mean, at this point, I think they're completely at the same point in the dungeon, right? It's just 2 seconds behind for Obey Alliance. This is really close.
I think that fear was what Obey Alliance needed. It was just enough of a mistake where it ended up costing somewhere around the 10-second range. The mobs got spread and stuff like that. Where now Obey Alliance has really clawed it back. And this trash pack is getting dealt with rather quickly. You do see that both of the teams have used that X marker to mark where in the maze they need to be going. And Ambition makes their way through this door just a little bit earlier, but Obey Alliance, not to be deterred, also makes their way through. And it's the Dragon, which is the slowest mini-boss in this area by a lot. And Obey Alliance is looking like they're getting ready to pull trash almost immediately, even though it is bolstering. Huh.
Yeah, that's actually very interesting. They must be thinking that they have enough focus target damage to get that dragon lower. But the interesting thing about Mists this time around in Season 2 is that the mace actually is RNG. It's not always the same mace that they're getting, but both of the teams get the same. So they don't know which one they get when they start the dungeon, but they know that the other team is gonna have the exact same one that they do. So that means that they still have to improvise. Well, not improvise, but they have to be ready to do different routes depending on which mace they get.
Yeah.
And that is actually something that is different to all the other dungeons, because in all of the other dungeons, there isn't any RNG like that involved. So this one definitely shows which team can, improvise and make sure that they have all struts set for different kinds of paths that they have to take through the maze. It looks like both Obey Alliance and Ambition know exactly what to do though, as they're on the same percentage as well, 49%, and gathering another huge pull, making sure they get all of the mobs done at the same time though, because of that bolstering. Don't want to lose any time with that one.
Yeah, and also something that both of these teams are doing that makes a lot of sense is both of them went for that bolstering anima power that gives you an increased damage dealt buff whenever you kill a mob. That really also works on explosive. But on screen here, Onesie ended up going down right as some of those mobs ended up dying off, and Ambition just has a couple of bolstering issues, but Obey Alliance has similar issues with these defenders and shapers being really tall. But it looks like both of the teams are going to be able to deal with them pretty quickly. That was just a minor time loss on both ends, but that 5 seconds for Ambition may end up coming back to cost them later.
Yeah, I think so as well, because they're so close to each other, and both of them having some bolstering issues because of the size of the pools, really. I guess if you have such huge pools, then it's very difficult to not get any bolster stacks on anything. Like, it's almost impossible to kill them at the exact same time. So some of the mobs are going to be bolstered. Of course, you want the mobs to be as low as possible before they get bolstered, though. And it looks like both of them did a really good job up until this point. At least on the previous poll, they had some issues. And it looks like, again, you can see some of the mobs here being pretty high HP still. Like the Shaper here for Obey Alliance, you can see they have a lot of bolster stacks here.
Yeah, and the Binding Shot is coming out, and now they just have to kite away from all of these mobs, losing an insane amount of damage by Skylark not being able to stand in melee. They are going to be able to get this pack dealt with, but Ambition has already engaged Mistcaller. The Ashen Hollow is down, and they are dealing with this boss pretty quick, trying to get Mistcaller into the first guessing game phase, but Obey Alliance has now dealt with their trash. Both of these teams are equal at 78% enemy forces count, and this is an incredibly close matchup, Nagura.
Yeah, it's super close. Ambition now, both of them actually dropping that Ashen that they have available here. I do think it's gonna be one more Ashen on the last boss, so they can pop it here and on the last. So big value coming out of those Holy Paladin CDs as they're using it for basically just pushing the boss into the first phase, while the other damage dealers don't have their offensive cooldowns available. They're getting through that intermission pretty quickly on Ambition's side too. Keep in mind this is just a 19, but still tyrannical, so the boss has a decent amount of HP that they still have to deal with, and it looks like they're also just kiting the boss around because it's kind of difficult to see the Vulpix if it spawns in melee range, just because you have the consecration on the floor and you have just random dots getting applied to them. So they just decide to run in a circle and just not to see it at all and just make sure they kite it.
And Obey Alliance has caught up and passed Ambition in terms of how much boss damage that they were able to emit onto Mistcaller, getting into that guessing game phase, that second guessing game, a little bit quicker. That happens at 40%. And now there's just one more guessing game for each of these teams. Ambition able to get that guessing game dealt with just a tad faster. Their healer or whoever is assigned to call out which mob it is, just a hair faster on the trigger. But again, as something we have to point out, there is a 5-second death differential in favor of Obey Alliance because they did have a death in the maze on the side of Ambition, which right now I don't feel like that Ambition can afford to have that 5-second differential.
I think so as well. I mean, they're completely at the same trash percentage too, so if the pools are going to be the same later and none of them make any sort of bolstering mistakes, then the 5 seconds might actually matter. As you can see, Obey Alliance now triggering that intermission phase as well. Ambition dealing with it slightly quicker. I think the difference here is just the cooldowns coming up at different points, right? We saw Obey Alliance getting ahead when they had their offensives ready, and then Ambition catching up again as they had their offensives ready. Ambition taking the scenic route through the maze, which is slightly quicker actually than to wait for the RP to happen. I think it's like a second or two that you gain if you do this perfectly.
Yeah, but the downside is that you can't really activate the nut to be able to have your checkpoint. Otherwise, you're going to be losing more time than you would have otherwise have. But Obey Alliance isn't even activating that Night Fae res checkpoint. And now Ambition popping their Shroud. Everybody's still mounted up, sprinting all the way through. They know how much count they need here. This is something that has been practiced. And Obey Alliance mirroring exactly what we just saw from Ambition, skipping some of those Staghorns and some of those Acid Gullets. And now Ambition is starting to group up all of these mobs, making sure that all the explosives are dealt with. And again, as I was talking about earlier, those explosives are actually a damage gain. They get 3% damage per explosive killed because they are running that tormented power that they were able to get. And it's not something that is very commonly seen. However, it is super good on explosive because you get it stacked up so quick.
Yeah, super smart to go with that bolstering and tormentor buff here, and Ambition dealing with this so quickly. There some high bolstered mobs though. It looks like there's one Gorger that has like half HP left still, so that's gonna take them a while to finish off. Looks like Obey Alliance dealt with this quite a bit better with the bolstering. You see this one Gorger, the one with the skull marker, actually was alive for a really long time and was still high HP. Obey Alliance, so they're already done. Obey Alliance dealt with this trash so much better. They actually, that was insane bolstering management by Obey Alliance. That was so good. As they're already fighting Tredova now, Ambition just now getting there.
Yeah, look at the splits at the bottom of the screen. Ambition was about 23 seconds ahead after the first boss, and Obey Alliance has been able to claw it back so hard, and it's going to be a nuke to the finish. but Obey Alliance has to win by Ambition has to win by over 5 seconds if they're going to kill Tradova in time. Both of these teams are at 96% enemy forces count, though, so that's something that you have to watch out for as well.
Yeah, this is going to be crazy close as they are just fighting Tradova. Both of them still have 4% trash left that they have to deal with after the boss. It is bolstering, so they're probably not going to be pulling anything on top. They're just going to run into a pack afterwards and get that last percentage.
They missed a kick for
Everyone
40.
dropping really low. Oh, they missed a kick for 40. That means one of those parasites went through, and that needs to be dealt with. But 40 going down as they just try to survive and try to recover from this. But now they're even with the time, and they probably lost some more time because of this death. And the engineering rest needs to be reused, which can be tricky to get off as well. And now Ambition just being in the lead again. Look at the boss HP. Tradova and 53% for them. It was looking so good for Obey Alliance, but because of this kick not going through, it just cost them so much time.
Dude, that kick was so bad because 40 was trying to get into melee of it, but since they are running that Auro's Cold Part like slow debuff, 40 was just not able to get in melee fast enough, and that would just compared with some of the ambient damage from the ticks being on him, hitting him, it just ended up making him die there. Ambition has another death, though. Nagura, it looked like Asuna just ended up getting hit by maybe one of those green puddles, and now they have to find his body. Look, you see the world marker coming out. They have to get an engineering battle res on him. That mind link is now tethered to JPC, and Onesie turtling and trying to get Azuna rezzed, but this is time that neither team can afford to waste.
This is going to be so incredibly close. There's 5 seconds in favor of Obey Alliance at this point. It looks like Tradova might be going down for Ambition in just a second, but 5 seconds is still in favor of Obey Alliance.
Once he died!
Once he goes down too, that's going to be another 5 seconds. 10 seconds in favor of Obey Alliance now. Ambition still has to deal with that 4% trash that they have left on the board as well while they're trying to get up Onesie, but it's taking them quite a while. And Obey Alliance now losing one of their players as well. Now it's a 5 seconds differential in favor of Obey Alliance.
Oh my goodness.
And at this point, I'm not even sure who's winning, as they're both at 99% trash. They need to get 1 extra percent. It looks like Ambition is done. 5 seconds on the board for Obey Alliance to do this, and it looks like they made it. I think this might have been Obey Alliance winning this by 1 second.
We're going to need an admin check, I think.
We're going to be checking on this one.
We're going to check on this, but man, of all the little deaths at the last possible second going back and forth onto this one, man, they've been doing a great job keeping this one close, Stratos.
Yeah, the referees are on the field right now. They're investigating exactly.
All right, looks like they're saying it's going to Obey Alliance.
And indeed,
there we go.
Obey Alliance are going to be taking that game. Wow, that was an incredible finish. I mean, it was one of those incredible finishes just because both teams found so many different ways to throw 5 seconds back at each other, and then the game ended up being less than 5 seconds separating the two teams.
Simply incredible on that one. Very great job by both these teams. Keeping it close. 2 seconds faster by Obey Alliance on that one. But also important to note as well, Nagura, that Complexity was like 1.5 minutes faster than both of these teams in Mists.
Yeah. I mean,
well, actually, I think that's
had
partially
a
the dragon.
36 clear.
Yeah, the dragon is bad.
Now that I think about it, I think it's actually
it's difficult
just the dragon.
to compare.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to compare the times here in Mist because of the maze difference. But Complexity also was running that complete different comp, right? They were running that full Shadow Melt comp with that Rasta Druid.
Yeah. And once again, getting to that point where we're starting to see the differences in composition and people's preferences coming around as well. And just, man, on this one, Dreadnoughts, they did everything they could to keep it close.
Yeah. So originally I was going to talk about some of these first, the boss burns that we were seeing out of these teams, because I figured this was going to be what was interesting about the match. And so you could see Obey Alliance, getting the boss down to like that 8% mark. Ambition getting a little bit more damage even into that burn. Ellesmere actually playing a damage build and damage legendary, whereas Lagbug on a more balanced setup on the Holy Paladin, leading to a little bit more damage for Ambition on that part. And then also, take a look at the way that Obey Alliance do Mistcaller here. You can see that they have some cooldowns rolling, right? They have Shadow Blades rolling here, and they actually burst some damage into this, and they nearly get Mistcaller. It gets to 4% here, but that's a little bit misleading, because if that thing got into Touch of Death range, they were going to skip that phase, and they were actually very close here. But then we get to this last boss, and it's just Death for Obey Alliance, death that takes a little while to res here. This almost cost them the game. But then we go over to Ambition's side, and Azuna here ends up just not being able to run out from his swirly projectile attack, and dies in a much worse spot. And then when teams were working on this trash here, both teams just trying to do as much damage as they can, and we end up having players going down for both teams right before they can stop their timers. So that, that tether just doesn't go away after the boss fight as well. So you can see those two players just still linked there and ticking each other for heavy damage. But they're just not going to go and stop that. At the end of the day, one death less for Ambition, and they have this, or just 2 seconds more optimization. But there were several mistakes on Obey Alliance's side as well, that if those hadn't existed, the gap would have been much less close as well.
That's right. Just incredibly insane how well these teams have been playing. We're not having any sort of catastrophic failure on the side of Obey Alliance like we saw out of that theater, Nagura. So they were just right there. And that's also going to be pushing us into a third game for Sanguine Depths.
Yeah, Sanguine Depths is definitely one of those really difficult dungeons because it is at 22 and it's tyrannical and inspiring. It's definitely not good on the teams with those affixes as well as the key level. We've seen it being played yesterday. The fastest time, I believe, was by practice with 22 minutes 37 seconds. So we'll see how they're going to be doing on this one. I hope sometimes there's a thing where the teams see, oh, okay, so this is going to be the third dungeon in this series, and if this dungeon is not actually in any of their other series, then it might say, you know what, we're just banking on not getting there. We're just focusing on the first two dungeons and not practicing this. But I do believe that Sanguine Depths is going to be in later matches as well, especially, actually it's only in the lower bracket. It's only in the lower quarter and in the lower final.
Well,
so if one of those teams was thinking, oh, we're just going to stay in the upper bracket, then theoretically they might have not practiced it, but we're going to have to see about that one.
Yeah, I think that lower finals is going to be a really important, we may end up seeing a rematch of these exact two teams down there as well. So this is a vital match, or vital map for them to be good at. If it shows up in both of those series, right, that is extremely important for their equity in that ticket out of this group.
With it being a tyrannical 22 with inspiring quaking, this is probably the hardest match for the hardest map to practice for the whole entire weekend, just in terms of how much time you can potentially sink in versus how much time it will take to optimize. Even yesterday, we had deaths on many bosses. There were a lot of mistakes coming into the Sanguine Depths, and I think that if either team has a deathless run through this dungeon, I suspect that they will probably be the team that wins it, because it's just the optimizations of the lanterns, who can make sure that they are pulling big while also dealing with inspiring and not having those racking bolt casts go off and just kill people. And it's just a bunch of different things that you have to deal with at the same time, while also doing MDI level pulls where you're just pulling absolutely massive.
That's right. And, it's going to be just very scary because this dungeon also is just so built off of that momentum, right? Even just having one person die and lose their 10-stack jar buff or anything like that can just be so catastrophic for these teams. And right now, we once they broke the seal, or once they stopped, or once they started having those deaths and everything, Nagura, it kind of kept coming as well for Ambition. We were talking about them having those deathless runs and everything so far, but this is also a dungeon that's very lethal.
Yeah, it must be nerve-wracking for them coming out of this mist, because of course they can also watch the stream. It is on a delay, on a 5-minute delay, but they must have known while they were playing the dungeon that the other team is incredibly close to them. So once they started having those deaths at the end of the dungeon, both of the teams, then they probably their adrenaline was probably pretty high, and once they realized how close it was, it must have been crazy for them. So now, being able to calm down and to play the Sanguine Depths now might actually be difficult for both of those teams. Ambition having never actually competed in an MDI, and then also Obey Alliance having those 3 new players that are also new to the MDI as well.
Yeah, both sides have some good veterancy as well. We got Nerf on the side of Ambition. Ellesmere's done previous MDI a couple years ago and everything. So they've got the experience there, and I particularly like how well Ambition has been adapting to this, and especially, the other 3 players on the side of Obey Alliance. Lagbug, for example, pushed high keys to Priest for a while. We love that. And of course, he started switching to Paladin last season and been working on that a lot more. So the adaptation, I think, for teams this season, Tettles, from live key pushers to actually MDI focused players, has just been so strong.
Yeah, and I think one of the biggest things, like you were talking about, is just compositional differences, because it is, I mean, a lot of times on live servers, you'll have like one main, maybe you'll have one alt that you play at like a super competitive level, but typically with high key pushing, you're just playing that one character. So being able to adapt and play multiple characters at an MDI caliber level is really difficult, and like we have seen like compositions being swapped up. It's like Dratnos was saying earlier, JPC has talked about how all three of their teammates have to be able to play that Windwalker monk. So it's just on a per dungeon basis, on a per pull basis, and everybody has to be ready, and it's all hands on deck on both ends, and it's going to come down to, I think, execution inside of the Sanguine Depths, at least.
Yeah, this is not a dungeon where I think that melee gang comp is really going to work either. I think they're going to need to rethink that and go in with a more caster ranged oriented plan, if I had to guess. But I'm curious, because we saw both teams landing on the exact same comps that other teams hadn't played in those dungeons, independently of each other. So really goes to show just how closely matched these teams are, both in execution and in the theory side of planning for these dungeons.
Yeah, and that theory side, I think, has been really what separated a lot of teams. You know, it's really separated the elite from the rest of the pack. And being able to have, from the get-go, different compositions than what we saw last weekend, different factions from what we saw from other teams this weekend. They have their own game plan, and they're getting extremely similar times to some of those other top teams. So the theory craft, the brains on each team between Ambition and Obey Alliance are just so big and so strong. Game number 3 is going to be deciding which of these teams moves on to the upper bracket and which one gets dropped to the lower. Ambition, Obey Alliance. Game number 3 is Sanguine Depths gets rolling.
I'm interested to see if we see any Warlocks.
I think the chances are really high, right? The only thing, because I actually think that Affliction Warlock might be the pick for sure in this dungeon. I think it's just so good. But then the problem is, if you don't really have anyone who plays Affliction Warlock in your team, because you have to be playing it on live servers, you're not going to be practicing it just for like one dungeon, right? Unless it's like a really big advantage. And I do think it's good. I just don't think it's necessarily maybe like needed. So yeah, it's gonna be hard for them to like practice that class just for this dungeon, and it looks like neither of them are doing it. So neither of them actually playing that Warlock here. We just see that very similar comp, but they're switching off from that full physical to just half magic, half physical. So it's gonna be the Vengeance Demon Hunter buffing that Frost Mage, and then we still have the Windwalker and the Rogue with that physical buff.
Yeah, it's also interesting that we've seen both of these teams running identical comps for effectively every single dungeon so far. So it's funny that while one of them is OC and one of them is NA, they come up with very similar strategies in the exact same comp. Is Obey Alliance pulling bigger on this first pack? It looks like they just have more trash inside of it, but I can't tell if it's just grouped up more thoroughly.
They have the Brood, right? They pulled the Brood and Ambition did not. So I wonder if that's just... I mean, it could be making up no difference at all if Ambition is not doing one extra pull, right? But we'll see what they do with this Brood. Actually, they're just skipping it completely. All right, so Ambition just using their Shroud to get past this Brood here. Very likely just going into the boss immediately because they have this Lantern buff now. You can see both of them having that red glow around them, meaning they have that Lantern buff. So I would assume they're going straight into the boss. Ambition even pulling that Tormentor mob. I think they might be pulling the Tormentor into the boss with this inspired tick.
Ooh.
Wow. Okay, so that's very interesting. Let's see if they can pull this one off.
Yeah, they CC'd one of the other inspiring ticks off to the side. I think they dropped a para on it, and it's interesting that they're not grabbing 2 inspiring ticks. They're just leaving that one. You see it's marked with a green icon, sitting there in a blind. Onesie immediately dies during the Bloodlust, and now a kick was missed on Incinerator Arcoleth, assuming that that's probably Onesie's kick that he needed to get, but it looks like Ambition's going to be able to recover that. But Obey Alliance is able to take a little bit of an early lead based off just being a lot more clean with how their first pull has been going here.
Did Onesie just get smacked by the boss. It looked like the boss turned around and just like hit him as he had all of his cooldowns running. It might have been that killed him here, unfortunately. One thing though to note is that even though Obey Alliance is lower in the boss, they didn't pull that Tormentor, and they're gonna have to deal with it. They're gonna have to go back and deal with this Tormentor because it's the fire Tormentor. You don't want to have that fire dot ticking on you on a 22 Tyrannical on the last boss. You definitely have to go and deal with that one. There's no way they can do that on the last boss. As they might be proving me wrong because they're looking at walking into the other direction. Never mind. Okay, so they are walking backwards, going towards the Tormentor. Ambition though, yeah, they lost definitely a little bit of time. As you can see, that boss takes them quite a long time to finish off here.
Yeah, so now they do still have that tick CC'd. I wonder when they are going to grab it in, whereas Obey Alliance is already 3% enemy forces ahead just because they did grab that Brood at the beginning, and it's looking like they are starting to get and create a pretty substantial lead. And it's just like we were talking about before the game, it's so momentum heavy, and even things like we saw from Ambition, they had like a couple of mistakes with the Executioner inside of that Mists, and it's just these really minor mistakes that while it looks like that death is going to cost them 5 seconds, on top of that 5 seconds, it's something like 15% of Crixus's HP, and that by itself is really daunting. Now Obey Alliance is retooling and pulling a lot more of this trash. They're grabbing Incinerator Arcoleth with a bunch of these ticks and brutes and stuff like that, making sure that they are getting the CCs on the ticks, making sure that they're getting the kicks on Arcoleth, and just dealing with all of this trash. And I want to see where Ambition is going to go from this point, because they do have to deal with that one parried mob since they're not running a full invisibility
They don't have
comp.
to.
Are they out of combat?
They're not
with
incumbent
that
with it, right?
Oh, I
Yeah,
thought
they use
thing...
the Ring of Peace to skip to like yeah, it's not
Interesting.
connected to the trash group actually.
Yeah.
So they are allowed to just completely skip this, which is really nice as they're now just gathering up a lot of this other trash here. Keep in mind there's an inspired mob in here. It looks like GPC is just focusing it down, making sure they can interrupt the rest of the mobs now. And they even have an Overseer here. Wow, okay, this is an insane pull. Not only do they have the Sentinel plus all of these oppressors, they also pulled an Overseer pack. They also succeed one of those oppressors that was inspired in the back, making sure they don't have the inspiring aura here. They also have just the chains go off from the Overseer. This is a pretty crazy pull, especially since it just happened after the boss. So some of the cooldowns were down still. They just now came back up, and they're gonna make sure they use them immediately to get done with this. But yeah, I do think that Ambition actually was not necessarily behind because they had pulled this Tormentor on top of the boss, meaning that they saved one extra pull. Of course, they're a little bit behind in trash because they skipped the Brute, and they also skipped a bunch of these ticks that were around the Tormentor.
JPC
Oh, it looks like JPC's in combat.
launching himself off the ledge.
Yeah.
Elismir also not launching himself off the ledge. Oh, these are some
And both of them were
really,
incumbent with the tick, I think.
really unfortunate deaths that had to happen because they didn't want to pull that tick by itself. Oh, that is so bad. And now Nerf sitting there getting a feast, eating while the rest of his team is eating themselves off the ledge. And now Nerf grabbing some of these acolytes, pulling them back on top of this lantern. They are going to be able to activate this lantern whenever they see it fit to get that Sinfall boon buff, which does give an ample amount of damage gain, 5% per stack, up to 10 stacks, so you can get a 50% damage gain. It's very, very lucrative, and those acolytes are going down really quick, and they're going to be able to burn the Overseer even through that damage reduction doubt debuff that he puts on the whole entire party.
Yeah, definitely still really close between those two teams as the Obey Alliance also gathering up 2 Overseers. So just a double pack into this Lantern. We also see the Ashen being popped by Lagbug here as well, making sure they get this done quicker as Ambition is now dealing with Varut, the mini-boss, and an Overseer. There's one inspired mob here that they might have CC'd off to the side, just to make sure that they can interrupt the Overseer here, plus the Oppressor that are doing a huge amount of AoE damage if those casts are not interrupted. And then on top of that, you also have that 50% healing reduction on everybody because of the root. So that's really, really scary. As they also have to just outrange the chains as well from the Overseer, and also dodge those frontal cyclones that the mini-boss is shooting out. So this is actually very dangerous.
Look at Obey Alliance. Obey Alliance is doing a different adaptation to this pull. The pull that Ambition is doing is something that's actually not super uncommon on live servers, where you're grabbing a bunch of this trash with that Javeliner, with the Oppressor, and the Executioner. However, Obey Alliance grabbing it with these scribes and all of these mobs that are in this hallway, and those scribes do their throw research cast. They're basically archers with books, and so that throw research cast can be very dangerous, and Obey Alliance is dropping so low, but they do get the Executioner dealt with, and now they're able to be top pretty easily. Skylark is now trying to move all of the trash. You see him line of sighting towards that lantern, try to get everything stacked up on that lantern. They're going to activate it and then be able to get more of the stacks of that Sinfall boon buff that we talked about earlier.
Wow, that was actually pretty crazy by Obey Alliance, because not only did they pull Baruth into this Warden pool, but they also had an Inspired mob. So they were not able to interrupt the Warden's chain cast, which, in case you guys don't know, if it goes through, it basically roots a person, and it's not about the root that is killing you, but the damage that it does. It's like a dot that ticks on you, like a bleed effect,
yes.
And it does huge amounts of damages, and it was actually on the mage that didn't even have to use Ice Block. Somehow he just managed to survive it. And yeah, that was crazy. And they just kept pulling stuff on top while also focusing Baruth down. And now they're dealing with some extra trash here onto that lantern that they activated. And you can see with the trash percentage, Ambition is now again a little bit ahead compared to Obey Alliance. It's really just going back and forth between these two teams. They're so close.
Yeah, but 15 seconds advantage for Obey Alliance just due to the fact that there are the 3 deaths on the board for the Ambition guys from having to jump off the ledge there. That may be coming back to bite them again in 2 dungeons in a row. We saw it happen in the Mists. Now Obey Alliance here, Skylark gliding around trying to grab a bunch of these mobs, potentially going to pull them back on top of the lantern to be able to refresh their 10 stack of that Sinfall boon buff, where Ambition wasn't really going for massive lantern optimization. They decided that they believe that they can kill Executioner Tarvald without just a massive refresh on that lantern. And now Nerf here is going and grabbing and fishing out the remainder of the trash and pulling it even back to that lantern. So the lantern's activation time, I believe it lasts 60 seconds, and it allows you to kill like a lot of mobs, especially if you have a significant amount of CDs. You can get refreshes really easily here if you know what you're doing.
Yeah, and definitely want to keep that buff for the boss that is going to come up here. It is a 22 tyrannical, so the boss is definitely very important to have buffs for, because if you don't have that lantern buff and you don't have bloodlust or something like that, then the boss fight can take a really long time, and incoming damage from it is just crazy, especially when you have that quaking that makes it really hard to deal with this boss, because there's so much area of denial already that the boss itself creates with the castigate and the beams coming through, that if on top of that you get a quaking as well, it can be really dangerous. JPC just jumps into the beam, immediately gets dispelled by Asuna on that mage, making sure that curse is gone. And they also pull some ghouls, so lots of damage coming in here on Nerf.
That's why JPC is the man. And Ambition and Obey Alliance ended up pulling Tarvald within a few seconds of one another. But again, like we were talking about, 15-second death differential in favor of Obey Alliance. So this is looking really good for them. They just need to make sure that they're continuing to play their game. 1% count differential between the two teams, 77 versus 78% enemy forces. I think that's pretty much negligible. I doubt it's really going to affect what you're going to be pulling on the back half of the dungeon. And Tarvald is starting to drop incredibly low for Obey Alliance. It's almost sub 20% HP. Ambition within a few percent as well. But it looks like Obey Alliance is going to be able to kill off Tarvald and make their way towards the third boss area just a little bit earlier.
Yeah, Obey Alliance really catching up on time here with just how they dealt with this ring area, with this Executioner Torvald trash and the boss itself. I think that was really well done with this, and really creative as well with the way they dealt with the Ruth. I like it a lot. I like skipping that mini boss there, making sure they deal with the other trash and just dragging it along. I really like it, as they're now engaging the next boss and pulling all of the trash in this room on top of the boss. The only mob that hasn't been pulled is Sogodon. That they definitely don't want to add that one. They even have some inspired mobs in there that it looks like. I think we saw some of the teams just to see the inspired mob and then pull everything else. But Obey Alliance, they don't care. They're just pulling everything. You can see Ambition is doing that very same thing that I just talked about, just not pulling that oppressor with the inspired aura in.
It looks like it's just not tethered. And Ellesmere...
Oh, never mind. It's not in for Obey Alliance either. Yeah, it's just sat there in the corner. I just didn't see it.
Yeah. So, but both of these teams not pulling that mob. I suspect that they're probably going to grab it Ooh, did they grab it yesterday after the boss, or like whenever the boss got low, or did they just omit it altogether? Oh, it looks like Obey Alliance is grabbing it right as I asked that.
Yeah, they heard you, and they also heard me, because when I didn't see them up, they put a circle marker on top of it. It's like, Nagura, it's here.
we need the help from the teams. They're listening to the broadcast.
But yeah, this boss actually really dangerous because of the high key level and the Tyrannical. Lots of AoE damage actually coming out here. You need to make sure you grab those orbs, reducing the damage that it does, and then on top of that, you also have that endless torment that you can see. Look at Ambition, like they're just dropping so low.
Azuna has 2 stacks of that.
Yeah, he's in the pot right now, it looks like. So he's gonna be fine after this pot is over, but definitely don't want to see that happen. Thankfully, no death on the board though, because they already have those 3 deaths. And it's gonna, I mean, at some point, it's gonna be hard for them to make up that time that they're losing from that death penalty. They already have 15 seconds that they need to finish the dungeon faster in comparison to Obey Alliance, because they're still at 0, right? Obey Alliance having such a clean run in the Sanguine Depths is actually really impressive.
Yeah, and now Beryllia is starting to drop pretty low. They're going to have one more cast of this Rite of Supremacy, which is, I mean, it's going to be pretty dangerous, but they do have things like Ice Block and other ways to be able to mitigate this right if they do need them. However, it just kind of depends on what you believe you need on a 22 Tyrannical, and you see Obey Alliance committing that additional Ice Block, allowing all of the remaining party members to grab 4 stacks of the of those circles that are on the ground that gives them damage reduction from that right. And Beryllia is starting to drop incredibly low. They're going to be able to get the 3rd boss down and continue to mount their lead even further ahead of where Ambition is, as they're also dropping Beryllia low.
Ambition having some issues here, as everyone is incredibly low, and they get one more Endless Torment. Should be fine at this point, but yeah, very scary, this boss specifically. Obey Alliance now dealing with Sogodon. Looks like they're dealing with it by himself, and I think that makes sense because they already have enough trash. Oh, Ambition is skipping the Tormentor. Wow, okay, that's actually crazy.
Oh, this is how they come back.
That's absolutely crazy to me. Yeah, okay, this is their chance to come back, but this is so dangerous, right? You have that physical damage increase on the last boss. On most other bosses in most other dungeons, it doesn't matter. You almost always leave Sogodon up because the only physical damage that you have is on the tank, and that one can be out-healed. But in this dungeon, the charge of the boss, if you get hit by it, it does physical damage. And on a 22 Tyrannical, it's very likely going to be close to one-shotting you, if not completely one-shotting you. But of course, the charge is dodgeable. The problem is, they also didn't deal with the other Tormentor that applies a 50% slow to you.
Yes.
So now you need to dodge a charge while being 50% slowed, which definitely is not easy on such a long fight as well.
This is how they come back, though. They absolutely needed to do this. They could not have afforded to kill Sogodon. For Obey Alliance, the extra conservative play may come back to bite them as well. It's really up in the air, and it's going to be a nail biter. It's going to probably come down to whether or not Ambition is going to be able to do the last boss and omit having any deaths. They do have one battle res available. Both of the teams are going to have that bloodlust for General Call, but with it being a 22 Tyrannical, it's not going to be a short boss, especially with that Sogodon buff.
Yeah, and then I guess they have the Dwarf Racial to get rid of that bleed effect. But the initial hit is what is so dangerous, right? So I guess they could make sure they always have some sort of defensive up to not get one shot, and then use the Dwarf Racial to get rid of it in case they aren't able to dodge it. But it's definitely gonna be hard. I'm sure they know what they're doing. I wonder if this was a decision that they wanted to do anyway, that they're confident in skipping Sogodon, or if they decided to do this because they know it's so close and they have to do something to catch up. I'm not sure about this one, but Obey Alliance definitely decided to kill it, as I can see the Tormentor timer here. 3 out of 4 on Obey Alliance side, so they only have the 50% slow to deal with. And both of those teams are very likely also going to try to get the Lantern buff into the last boss. They also saved the Bloodlust for it, so they are going to have a huge amount of damage.
Yeah, and so looking at this, Ambition doing a great job of tanking all of these mobs on top of General Call. Whenever you have this Gargoyle, I guess is the best way to describe it. The Sentinel, I think, is the name of that mob. Whenever you have the Sentinel on top of General Call, whenever you have to group up and get inside of that shield, it can be really, really dangerous if he does his explosion and those spikes shoot out of the ground and knock people up. Oh, Nagura, though, here comes the last pull for Ambition. They're grabbing all of the trash with the boss, and like we were talking about for the past couple of minutes, that Sagadon 50% physical damage taken increase buff on the whole entire party, making Nerf take insane amounts of damage from the trash, but the trash gets almost melted once he gets hit by the first tick from the General Call dash and almost goes down, but it's looking like Ambition is doing okay. General Call still really high on HP, though.
It's just so much damage he saw once he get hit there, and he dropped so incredibly low. Thankfully, he did manage to survive. And there's going to be a bunch more charges, though. Look at the HP of the boss. You need to go to 50% to kill the boss. And the Bloodlust and the cooldowns are going to be running out in a second. So this is still going to take a long time. And once he keeps getting those charges, and he has a hard time dodging those, he used Shadow Melt, but it didn't work, and he still got the charge. Look how low he drops from this initial tick even, and the bleed is still on him. It has actually the same icon as the physical damage increase debuff, so it's hard to tell when they have a bleed, but once he definitely has one still, he needed to be buffed now. So Ellesmere actually used Bob to save once here because again he has gotten a charge on him and he's running out of defensives to even survive the initial damage. So now they hopefully get some more charges on other members of their team because once they just completely running out of defensives and tools to deal with this one. But another one on Wansi, unfortunately. Another charge, and you can see just how slow he is. And this time, Asuna goes down.
This is so
Once he
bad.
drops incredibly low. They do have a Battle Rush available, but they still need the boss. They still need 9% of the boss, and they're 20 seconds behind now on the death timer. And you can see Obey Alliance. They're now also on General Call, and they're catching up, right? This is going to be so close again.
Yeah, they're catching up because they were able to do this more safe strategy. They pulled a lot less trash into General Call. On top of that, they have to be less like worried about like hauling out of melee and not getting hit by that dash because with this many melee players, it can be dangerous if you get ticked by even one on the side of Ambition. And JPC dropping to 2% HP, able to get healed right back up, but Ambition is still starting to lose even more ground. They need 6% left on General Call, where Obey Alliance only needs 7% at this point.
Yeah, they have to. Ambition has to play so safe. Ellesmere goes down. They don't have a battle rest. This is gonna be. Once he going down too, this might just be a disaster for Ambition. Nerf goes down as well. This is gonna be a full team wipe. They just can't recover from this one. They tried to do this like Hail Mary kind of boss pull where you just skip the Tormentor, and it just didn't work out, unfortunately. Just too much to deal with, and also not only did they wipe, but they lost so much damage on the boss because they had to play so safe, right? They needed to have the players walk away from the boss with that 50% slow and making sure they dodge the charge. And it just cost them so much single target damage. That's why Obey Alliance actually managed to catch up. They don't have that physical damage increase. They only have the slow. They don't have to. They can just get hit by that charge, and it's not going to be that bad. Blackbuck is going to be able to out-heal it. And now, all eyes on Obey Alliance as they're about to finish off that boss. And surprisingly, they're going to be the lower-seeded team that wins this game against Ambition here. 2-1. Wow, what a performance by Obey Alliance.
That's the big upset right there. Obey Alliance, no deaths. Take a bit more time to be able to kill off the extra Tormentor that, you know, a lot of cases kind of cost Ambition onto that one. Too many deaths, just too much damage, really, in a lot of those cases to be able to heal through and save everybody there, Dratnos.
Yeah, I wouldn't go so far as calling it an extra Tormentor for Obey Alliance. I would say it was more a case of, like, Ambition skipped a Tormentor that has never been skipped before, and we have seen why. We've seen why the teams do not skip Sagadon in this dungeon on this key level with these affixes. That was so rough on the last boss.
Yeah, and, you know, if you also just look